Welcome to Humanity Rising. I'm Tom Eddington. Jim Garrison is away this week. Welcome to our day 5 on this unique and special series we've done on forgiveness. It's been an extraordinary week. I've done, I think, probably about 150 shows now on Humanity Rising, and there's been something about this topic, this discussion, this series of dialogues we've been having this week on forgiveness that struck a chord. I monitor the chat for each of the sessions and have been doing that for the 150 or so shows that I've done. And there's been an aliveness, there's been a vibrancy in the chat, and the after chat this week has been extraordinary. And I'm in some ways perplexed and encouraged about what is it about this topic of forgiveness? Is it just this time and this space that we're living in as a species, where there's so much forgiveness that's needed on behalf of humanity for the degradation and the destruction of our planet, so much forgiveness that's needed and wanted for the way that we've treated each other, the way the global North has treated the global South, the way that countries have treated other countries, gender. I mean, there's so many things that are an invitation, a calling for forgiveness and the repair that would be possible with that forgiveness, both self-care, self-repair, and repair for each other. And I'm just wondering if that's what's in the ether that folks are responding to this week, or if it's something else. But I'm delighted to be having today's conversation, a culmination of an extraordinary week. And we've got two panelists that are going to help us enter into a dimension of forgiveness that we haven't spent a lot of time on this week, which is the spiritual dimension. And with that in mind, I just want to remind our audience that today is October 4th, and that's the day that the Catholic Church celebrates the pardon of Assisi. When St. Francis asked the Pope at that time, just over 800 years ago, for the opportunity for everyone in the Catholic Church to descend on Assisi and to be pardoned for their sins. And it's a particularly special time in the world, and just delighted for the dialogue we've had this week, the panelists, and especially my good friend and colleague Eileen Barker. Eileen, welcome.
Here we are. Thank you so much, Tom. What a beautiful introduction you've given us. And I really want to acknowledge you and really in some way on behalf of everybody in the Humanity Rising community, because I've really seen this week how important it is to people, how touched people are by it, and really engaged in this incredible community. And as you just said, you have hosted over 150 of these talks. That's a lot of weeks. And I know, just from going through one of them, how much goes into one of them. Now multiply that, by all those. And so what a tremendous service that you're giving here to the planet and to all the people who are engaged here. And I know that it's something you do from your heart, and it's your passion, and one of many, I should say. People, this is, one piece of so many things that Tom does, but this is what they all have in common. They're huge, and they impact a lot of people. And you stand in this, in the background in some way, but your vision is extraordinary, and your capacity to take action. So I really want to thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for the planet.
Well, as you know, it's a joy to be able to orchestrate an extraordinary week like you and I have been able to do this week, and it certainly couldn't have happened without you and the panelists. So delighted to be here, and really looking forward to today's program.
I want to mention one other thing, the thing I was supposed to say. That was spontaneous. What I wanted to just tell everybody is that I really, especially when I've been able to participate in these after chats, just seeing how strong and precious this community is, and people are really so engaged and with forgiveness and wanting to, how do we stay together and keep working on this? How do we create this movement? So to that end, I created a survey last night, and I've just posted a link in the chat. Would love to hear from all of you, if you're willing, those of you on the Zoom, and I know some people are watching this on YouTube and you don't have access to that, and maybe that can be posted somehow in other places, but I know for today, for right now, it's in the Zoom. And so that we can hear from you. And if you want, we can stay connected. So so that's what I wanted to say before we dive in to, oh, there is one other thing. Um, there's one other thing. There has been a very special group of people with us this week, in the audience, if you will, and they are people from who've gone through a program that I created almost 10 years ago called the Forgiveness Coaching Program. And many of the graduates have been with us. And in the chats, Marquita was a graduate. You met Marquita on Wednesday. Was it Tuesday? Wednesday?
Tuesday.
Which day?
Wednesday. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Wednesday.
you.
Apologies.
Nikki hasn't been in this meeting, but she's been in the after chat, so people are getting to know Nikki Schmidt, and many others are with us, and I just want to acknowledge them and let people know that this program is quite extraordinary. And contact me if you're interested in learning more about it. It's an in-depth journey into forgiveness in which you come out with the tools to help other people, to teach, to bring the work forward. So I gather that this is a place where many people, that may speak to many people, and so I want you to know there is that is happening. Okay, now
Well,
before,
let's bring our guest into today's program.
okay,
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
there we go.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, hi.
Welcome,
Yeah.
Marina. Welcome, Olivier. So
Lovely to be here.
well, we're blessed to have a couple of panelists outside of the US so we could take this conversation of forgiveness global. So welcome, and delighted to have you with us today, and would love for each of you just to share a little bit about your journey and how it is you came to forgiveness and the gifts that you're giving to the world. Raina, would you like to go first?
Yes, absolutely. Well, my background's journalism. I hadn't thought very much about forgiveness, actually, until the Iraq War. And there was something about that war that politicized me. And I often say the Forgiveness Project, which is the organization I founded and which is 20 years old now, the Forgiveness Project grew out of anger. Because I went on all the demonstrations. I was convinced the harder you come down on people, the more they regroup in a more resistant and angry way. And of course, we weren't listened to. And as a result, as a journalist, I thought, what can I do? I've got a small voice. And I thought, as a private project, it really was. Let's start collecting stories about forgiveness. And I was traveling quite a lot with a photographer. He took the photographs, I did the interviews. And over the course of a year, we collected 26 stories from victims, survivors of atrocity, of crime, of abuse, people who had found peaceful solutions to harm and to pain, and also along the way talking to former perpetrators and offenders who transformed their aggression into a force for peace. And these stories then became an exhibition called The F Word, because by then I knew what a contentious subject this was, very contested territory, split public opinion down the middle like a guillotine. The exhibition launched in January 2004. It was just so successful. It took my life in this whole different way. I mean, you've both mentioned, Tom and Eileen, how the energy of this subject. But I had no idea. I thought this was just another journalistic project. And I go back to mainstream journalism. But oh no, I started the project, a charity called the Forgiveness Project, which collects and shares stories that bear witness to the transformative power of non-violent and restorative approaches to harm. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
And we should give the link to that website because it's a phenomenal website. It's that someone can put this in for us, but the Forgiveness Project, is it a .com, Marina?
Yes.com, yeah.
Yeah. And so I know that took you into a deep dive, in a sense, into forgiveness. And now you've written some wonderful books about it. And we'll talk more about some of the other things you've gone into.
Yeah,
For sure. Yeah.
yeah, thank you.
Well, Olivia, if you can share just a little bit about your journey as well.
Yes, indeed. I was raised a Catholic, so forgiveness was part of the religion I grew up with. But I must say, I didn't have a real feeling of it. It was just something we were supposed to do. It was more mental, something you do if you're polite and kind to others, but not a heartfelt process. And I'm a writer. I've been writing since the age of 21. I have 25 books out today. And I've translated about 100 books from English to French from many authors very well known in spirituality. And what I would do was to meet the authors that really moved me, touched me, because the book is one thing, but the man or the woman behind the book is very interesting to meet, to see if they walk their talk, for instance. So I was very lucky in 1998 to read a book that was not yet world famous called The Four Agreements by Miguel Ruiz. And I translated it in French. And while I was writing, I was wondering if the man was in the way that I could feel through the book, like some sort of an incarnation of an unconditional love. And by the next year, 1999, so that's 25 years ago, I had the opportunity to go to a retreat in Mexico and New Mexico for 2 weeks and to meet Don Miguel. We were a small group because, as I said, he wasn't yet world famous. So we were very lucky. And during the time I spent with him, he had me go through a short but extremely powerful forgiveness ritual that literally changed my life. There was a before and after this experience. And before I left Mexico, he told me, he knew I was a writer, and he told me, you have a new book to write. And the name just popped in my mind immediately, The Gift of Forgiveness. But to be honest, it took me 10 years to write that book. I wrote it in 2009, and I just wanted to write a book. That was it. I had no intention of giving workshops or doing anything else around it, maybe a few lectures like I do to promote a book, but that's it. But as soon as the book was released, people started asking me to give workshops. So I made up one. And the interest grew so rapidly that after a year, I thought I can't be alone doing this. There's just too much work. So I thought, why don't I make a condensed version of it in 2 hours instead of 2 days? And I created Circles of Forgiveness in 2012. And I thought it would be nice if 10, 15 people start creating such circles, so I'm not alone to do this. But the thing is, it grew like mushrooms, and within 12 years, we must have trained 700 people in 15 countries to create their own circles of forgiveness, and it has had an amazing impact. And simultaneously, I thought, okay, I have this fantastic tool that I'm sharing, but there are many others. So we created a conference in France called the Days of Forgiveness. And we invited 20 international speakers every year to share their own methods, their own experience. And we were very fortunate to have Eileen, to have Fred Luskin, to have Marina as well on the first edition. So the idea was to promote forgiveness beyond any specific method, to offer a variety of methods among which participants could choose the one they felt could work for them. So forgiveness has been an amazing adventure for the past 15 years for me. I never thought I would dedicate so much time to it. But I always say I've been in the world of personal development and spirituality for 45 years, and nothing, honestly, has changed my life and the life of other people so lastingly and so deeply than this work on forgiveness.
I'm just curious for both of you, you had an unexpected event happen that has changed your life. And what, I mean, how much of it do you attribute to spirit? How much do you attribute to something other than um, your own intentions, your own activities, or the activities of others? Where do you attribute to, and how do you hold that in the scope of your life?
Marina, you want
Yeah, I can start. Well, I never really think of it in those terms. I would say I attribute it to a sort of sense of compassion that I have for fellow human beings that's very strong in me. As a child, and I was always a peacemaker. I always wanted to understand why people hurt people. Um, and I think that's where it comes from. I was brought up myself a Catholic. I rejected that. For many years, I was a Buddhist. I rejected that. I don't quite know what I call myself now. For a long time, I called the Forgiveness Project grittily secular. I was very keen to carve out a space that didn't align itself to religion or spirituality until one of my storytellers, someone who shares her story about her sister being killed by a serial killer who's been on a big journey of forgiveness, she says, you shouldn't describe the Forgiveness Project as grittily secular. It clearly isn't. Every story there comes with a strong spiritual backbone. And I suddenly thought, she's right. Of course, there is something deeply spiritual about the very nature of forgiveness. But then you have to start defining spirituality, and I find that more difficult.
Hmm.
Well,
How about
in
for
my
you,
case,
Olivier?
how can I put this? I think I believe in fate, in destiny, and I've had a strong aspiration ever since I was very young to serve, to be of service to this world, to contribute in one way or another. But I hadn't a specific form in mind how I could serve. So I've been a journalist, I've been a publisher, I've been a translator, I've been an interpreter. I've even been in politics for a short while. I've tried many avenues. And at first, when this gift of forgiveness was given to me, I had no intention to dedicate myself to that. But I listen to what life tells me. And when life is pushing me once, twice, and three times in the same direction, whereas I wanted to go in a totally different direction, I I say, okay, let's try this. So at first, I did this almost going backwards, you know. And until I realized that this was just the perfect thing for me, that in French we say I felt like a fish in the ocean, you know. It seemed so natural to be in this place and to be doing exactly that.
Hmm.
That's really beautiful. You know, Yes- Yesterday, I found my definition of spirituality from Kim. Kim Wright was talking about this legal movement that she calls integrative law, and that she's traveled the world meeting lawyers who all felt like they were the only ones that were seeing the problems and wanting to do things differently. And she said at one point, she said, I've met traveling the world like 15 people who think they invented collaborative law. And she says, and I think they're all telling the truth. They're all right. They all did invent it, but it just came out of all of them independently, and they're doing the same thing. And that's when I realized, because she was nonlinear enough to not say, well, one of them's right. Who is it? Which one's right? That's what we would normally say. And that's when I realized spirituality, my new definition is it's whatever it means to you. And maybe some people say it doesn't mean anything to me. Well, then that's okay. Because I've wrestled with that too, not talking about it because I want to be inclusive. I don't want it to leave anybody out. I definitely don't bring it from a religious framework because that is really fraught. and inappropriate, I think, in the public universities that I've taught in. But but I think at the same time that sometimes I'm reticent to talk about it. It seems so core and so important because, you said at the beginning, Tom, we're in this amazing time, and this is like really striking a chord with people. And somebody said the other day, there's so much positive energy coming right now. It's an extraordinary time. I know a lot of people like really aren't seeing that because they're so focused on they're focused over here at all, but actually there's a lot of positivity coming towards us. And the thing for me, and I believe it's not complicated, like we always have a choice. Where do we put our attention? And we've talked about that, but the doorway between those two worlds is forgiveness. The doorway between sort of the old fear-based paradigm and the new love-based paradigm is forgiveness. And the more we forgive, the more access we have to it. So for me, that's spiritual. That's a soul journey. And so I really do want to talk about that today. So I think it's important. Yeah.
Eileen, could I just mention a quote that I found when I was looking into it, and I
Please.
write it in my book. I just really like this. This really spoke to me. It's from the satirist Mike Yaconelli, and I think he rather exquisitely summed up what spirituality was to me. Anyway, I don't know, it might resonate with others. He said, spirituality is not a formula, it's not a test, it is a relationship. Spirituality is not about competency, it is about intimacy. Spirituality is not about perfection, it's about connection. The way of the spiritual life begins where we are now in the mess of our lives. And I love that because I've always thought forgiveness is very messy too.
Well, if I may add something, in a lot of spiritual traditions, a spirit is said to be one, in the sense that everything bears spirit. Spirit is in stones, is in trees, is in the clouds, and in the stars. It's everywhere. So if spirit is one, I think spirituality is a path that brings us closer to unity, that diminishes division and conflicts and separation. So there are thousands of ways of being closer to other people, closer to nature, and to bridge conflicts and violence. And I think anything that people do along these lines is spiritual, whether they know it or not.
I love that. That it's a
Yeah.
path towards unity. I love that. And
So
so it's forgiveness.
Yeah,
Yes.
we asked a question earlier this week, and I just want to build off of your comment, Olivier. So my belief system is we all have a spiritual core, and we lose track of it as we enter our adolescence and our adulthood, and then we have to work to return to finding our spiritual core that was there from preconception. And when we return to that spiritual core, we come alive again. We can feel it. Others can see it. They can experience it. And yet we resist putting the time to stay connected to our spiritual core. And as we've discussed this week, without forgiveness, it's self-administered poison. And people feel liberated when they can find that sense of forgiveness for any relationship. And so I'm curious for the two of you, whether it's the conversation around spirituality and our returning to our spiritual core or forgiveness, what's the impediment? What gets in the way for individuals to find forgiveness, either for themselves or for other?
Well, in my experience, I think forgiveness is such a very loaded word, and there are so many misunderstandings about it. That's the reason why I wrote my second book called Healing the Wounds of the Heart, with the subtitle, The 15 Major Obstacles to Forgiveness and How to Overcome Them. There are so many wrong ideas about forgiveness, what it is, that people can't even start on that path because there are those huge obstacles like big stones that stop them from walking that path. Once you remove that, and I've done that for years through lectures, through videos, through webinars, then people start reconsidering what it means. You know, I have several definitions of forgiveness, but the simplest one I've been using for the past 10 years is I say forgiveness is the healing of the wounds of the heart. We've all been wounded there. Sometimes just one major wound in infancy, early childhood, adolescence, whatever. Sometimes hundreds of small wounds that accumulate. And because the heart is in between the head and the hands, then if we're sick in the hearts, we're sick in the mind, and we're sick in the bodies. And everything we do is influenced by these wounds of our heart. If we manage to heal the heart, then we don't need to do positive thinking. Our thoughts change automatically. And as Dr. Fred Luskin was saying, I mean, it changes our health as well. So, and what I like about the work that I do and this ritual that Don Miguel shared with me is that it's not intellectual. You give the opportunity to people in 2 hours to get a first-hand experience of what forgiveness can be, but in such an unusual way. It's a turnaround 180 degrees from what we usually do, that their mind just goes away and they can feel in their hearts and bodies what forgiveness can really be.
It might be a good time to say more, if you would like, Olivia, about that process, because it is so powerful. And I think it speaks to something people are really asking about this week, which is, you know, when you say, well, I'm going to forgive you, there's sort of an egotism in it. It's like, you know, I will bestow this gift on you, and I'll forgive you, and the sort of, you know, superiority of it, which I'd love to hear. I know that speaks to the heart of what you're doing.
Yes, I can make a short resume of what happened to me. When I was in Mexico on the second day, we were this small group, like 18 people. And at some point, Don Miguel made this very unusual request to me. He asked me to kneel in front of the first woman that was on my left, and he said, just ask forgiveness from her. So I was very surprised. He was not telling me why should I do that. But I had learned in my spiritual life that sometimes you have to do things before you can understand them. So I thought, okay, maybe we've got some karma to get rid of, you know. I was making assumptions. So I knelt in front of that woman. I looked at her for a while, and I said, please forgive me because, and I was trying to come up with a reason, you know, like when I was a kid, going to the priest and finding some sins that I had committed for confession. And Miguel stopped me and said, no, don't try to find a reason. Just ask forgiveness from her, and then move to the next person and do the same, and the next, and do the whole group. And here I am on my knees, having to ask forgiveness from everybody here, and I don't know why. But okay, if I have to do this, I will do it. So I move to the next person. I look at that person and say, please forgive me. And by the third or fourth person, I'm looking at this woman. And when I start saying, please forgive me, suddenly it's not her that I'm seeing, it's my own mother. It's like the face of my mother superimposes itself on this woman's face. And it's like if through that woman here in the group, I'm actually asking forgiveness from my mother who's thousands of miles away. So that's quite something. And then again, 4 or 5 people later, there's this man in the group. And when I look at him, again, I see another face, the face of a colleague I had some years before, with whom the relationship was very tense, very difficult. And so through that participant in the group in Mexico, I am actually asking forgiveness from a man living in France that I haven't seen in years. And suddenly I get it. These 18 people I have no unfinished business with them. I have no problem with them. So I'm being offered a sample of humanity. There are men, there are women, there are younger ones, older ones, and through them I can ask forgiveness from anyone on this planet, living or dead, that I have problems with. So I end the circle with an amazing awareness of what's going on in me. And I feel like something is unlocking inside. And that's just the first step. Second step, Miguel asks that I come to him, and he asks me to ask forgiveness from my scapegoats, meaning the people, the organization, the structure, the political parties that we demonized, those we think are responsible of the evil on the planet. And he tells me something very important. He says, ask forgiveness from them for using what they do and what they say to keep your own heart shut. That's very important. He's not asking me to ask forgiveness for what they do. They are responsible for what they do. What do I do with what they say, with what they do? So I close my eyes and I ask forgiveness from all my scapegoats. And I feel that something else is unlocking inside. Third step, he asked me, well, he said, ask forgiveness from God. But, you know, I teach forgiveness to all sorts of people. And for some people, God is a word that they can't use. So in circles of forgiveness, we say, ask forgiveness from whatever is greater than you. It can be life, it can be the cosmos, the source, the universe, whatever. And Miguel said again, you know, even what is most sacred, we can use to keep our heart shut. And immediately I thought of those people who say, where was God in concentration camps? Where is God when a woman is raped, when a child is the victim of a pedophile? And so I realized we could even use that, you know, to remain in our woundedness and our anger and our resentment. So again, I close my eyes and I ask forgiveness from what is greater than me. And fourth and final step, and Miguel is kind enough to tell me this is going to be the toughest of all. He says, now please ask forgiveness from yourself. And why do I say it's the toughest? Because it's amazing. We live in a society where most people hate themselves, judge themselves, do not respect themselves, have no self-love. It's amazing. And so it's very difficult for us to reach that self-forgiveness. But it's like, I don't know the word in English, that stone that allows all the other stones, you know, in architecture to remain together.
It's called a keystone.
Yes, the keystone. Thank you, Tom. So suddenly I realized that I could not be my worst enemy for all my life, that this inner war had to stop. So one last time I closed my eyes and I asked forgiveness from myself, from all the different ages since I was a baby to present times. And it's like the last lock unlocked. And I had this amazing peak experience where I felt like something was opening up or being washed away in my heart. And I was at last free. And, you know, the amazing thing is that never did Miguel ask me to forgive. 4 times, he asked me to ask forgiveness from others, from my scapegoats, from God, from myself. And this amazing turnaround of asking forgiveness instead of forgiving is an amazing door. I've seen it hundreds and hundreds of times over the 15 past year, where suddenly people, there's a letting go inside. All they have held, that we hold our grudges, suddenly something opens up, and there's magic in that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That was really powerful. I mean, more than the words and the experiences, just I could feel the spirit of what you experienced.
If I may just add one thing, you know, I was raised a Christian. As I said, I was raised a Catholic. And one day I was already leading circles for a couple of years. I remembered the words of Jesus on the cross. He doesn't say, I forgive you because you don't know what you're doing. And he's Jesus. I mean, for a Christian, he's the Son of God. What does he do? He says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. So I thought, if he doesn't put himself in a position to forgive, who am I to forgive?
Beautiful. And that experience, I know, is what went into your book, as you explained. In that book, I remember just came across this little blurb about it in a magazine, and that's what brought us together, because I then interviewed you for a program I was doing it at the time. And then when I was in France at Olivier's conference that he does, this Day of Forgiveness, I was able to actually participate in a huge circle of hundreds of people, although you don't go around the whole thing, and experience the power firsthand. And then before the couple years, I don't know, let's say maybe 2018-ish, Olivier asked me if I would lead those circles here, which I had the honor to do. And we were leading them for regularly until the pandemic, and actually experimented to see if there's some way to do it online, because people really miss them. And I say that I wasn't able to find that. And I think it's a testament to the process. It's so, there's a lot you can do on Zoom, but not this. That you really need to be standing with the person. And so anyway, just to say that I've experienced this now many times, what he's saying. And I remember one of the most powerful ones that I saw when I was leading them here was a family, a beautiful family came, the parents and two, they were grown, but they were young sons, maybe college age is what I think, or maybe even high school. And in that circle, the parents were asking the children will you please forgive me? And it broke them all apart, and everybody else too, when they shared it later. It was just such a profound thing to be doing this at that level, at that deep soul level. Please forgive us, to your children, and having that. I thought, wow, that family just got even more beautiful and bonded.
Marina, over to you. Can you speak to what are the obstacles that get in the way of our relationship with spirituality and forgiveness?
Well, coming from a slightly different angle, I often think that sometimes the way forgiveness is talked about and framed as a obligation, and that if you haven't forgiven, you've failed in some way. That can be an obstacle. I think we should tread very carefully on this subject, because make forgiveness an obligation, it becomes a kind of tyranny. And people often talk about unforgiveness, and I'm really interested by what they mean by unforgiveness. Often they do mean stuck and frozen and tormented and angry, but maybe it's simply choosing not to forgive. So I'm interested by a woman that I met not long ago, and she was the victim of sexual assault. And she said, I understand what forgiveness can do. It can release me and relieve me and help me. But actually, in solidarity with the other women who have been assaulted and raped, I choose not to forgive. And I think, like apology, forgiveness is really powerful, because we can choose to reject it. And one day you might forgive, the next day you might hate all over again. We're human. We are triggered, things happen, life changes. So in the work that I've done, while I totally have seen, and the stories we share, there's nearly 200 of them now, really show the benefits of forgiveness, they also don't hide away from the difficult areas either. And they show the stories are nuanced, I think, and they're very authentic. And I felt that was really important, because I personally, when I started collecting stories, the last thing I wanted was for people to read the stories and feel I failed, I'm lesser, because I can't forgive. So I wanted to show it as a messy journey. So for instance, one of the storytellers is a man called Rami Elahan. He's an Israeli. He's part of the Parent Circle, Fabulous Forum. I'm sure some of you know that amazing organization of Palestinians and Israelis who've both been bereaved. It's been going for many years now. It continues under very difficult circumstances at the moment, as you can imagine. Rami's teenage daughter was killed in a suicide bombing in Tel Aviv. And he says, I do not forgive and I do not forget. But the suicide bomber was a victim like my daughter, grown angry through shame and poverty. And if you meet Rami, you would say, what a deeply spiritual, compassionate, forgiving man that is. But he doesn't want to use the word forgiveness. And I've got others. And, you know, I think Eileen was mentioning this power imbalance. You know, to forgive someone who doesn't feel that they've hurt you can become a bit of an accusation sometimes. So I think I think there's sometimes a danger of just generalizing a lot about this word. I also think there's sometimes a danger of over spiritualizing it, which can put people off. I suppose as a journalist, when I think about my own position, I've always been so keen to draw people in. I want the skeptics. I want the people who think forgiveness is rubbish. I don't want to forgive. That's weak. That's about condoning. You know, I want those people to be engaged in this subject. And I've always known that I'll only do that if the stories that we share, people can relate to them, that they are relatable. But just the last thing I want to say about forgiveness, I mean, I think, Olivia, you said about your definition, and it's interesting. I once heard Fred Luskin say, I don't know if he said this, I didn't hear his talk with you this week, but I once heard him say, I've given up on all definitions. I just use one word, freedom. And after that, I thought, well, they're very tricky, these definitions, because they never quite encompass the whole thing. But I work with forgiveness is making peace with things or people or events that you cannot change. But then I also know that it's not fully the whole thing, because it does require a degree of compassion for the person who's harmed you. And I think that's actually the really difficult thing about forgiveness. It's more than letting go. It's more than acceptance. And the other thing, just finally, is that I think pain is the greatest motivator to forgive. So if you think about being harmed or being in pain, there's so many different ways we could respond, like revenge or self-medication, self-harm, silence. We can go into denial. But the most transformative and restorative response, it seems to me, to pain is to go towards forgiveness. You know, I say go towards because it's such big territory. It's not a destination. It's a landscape. And I think the really amazing thing about forgiveness is that it's a heartache in a way. You don't eliminate the hurt. You you go closer to the source, and in going closer to the source, you transform your relationship to it. And I think that's the most remarkable thing, really.
Yeah, just picking up on a couple of things you shared, that, you know, certainly the messiness. And I would just ask each of the three of you, you've been at this work for decades now. And where would you put yourself on your journey in terms of how you're living your daily life, where you've been able to forgive, how easy it comes to you, how hard it is to forgive in certain situations, and what are those situations? I'd love to hear from each of you on your journey and where you would put yourself in this sort of evolutionary path that you're on towards living a life of forgiveness.
If I may start, to me, when I was given this gift, I realized that it could be used as We take daily showers because none of us today in this century want to go around and leave unpleasant odors behind us. And sometimes I ask in my workshops, what about emotional hygiene? Don't we have some old angers and resentment and things in our hearts that are not very pleasant to smell? Don't we need a shower of the heart on a regular basis? And so before I wrote my book, as I said, it took me 10 years, but I would take 5 or 10 minutes before going to sleep, reviewing what happened during the day. And instead of letting my dreams try to make the necessary cleansing, I would just do this little 4-step process. And that's why I wrote my initial book, The Gift of Forgiveness, was just to share this very simple bhakti yoga, devotion yoga, as the people that would say in India, that allows this cleansing. And I think if you do this on a regular basis, like you do hatha yoga for your body, or another practice, sports or whatever, or meditation, if you do this on a regular basis, then you don't have this small accumulation over months, years, or decades of things that end up either diminishing your capacity to love and creating an armor, like some of the preceding panelists mentioned, or one day you just explode because you've accumulated so much resentment. So that is something that I've kept doing on a regular basis, maybe not every day today, but when I feel the need to do this cleansing, to do this shower of the heart, which doesn't keep me sometimes from being in a tense situation. I think what we've gone through internationally over the past 3 years has been very challenging to a lot of us. And it has allowed me to go one step deeper in what I had to let go, what I had to ask forgiveness for, to release myself from judgments that were rising fast.
I like that practice. For many years, I would, as I would go to bed at night, I would ask myself just a simple question: do I like how I showed up today? And if the answer was yes, why? And if the answer was no, why? And it would be a nice way to allow myself to process the day and go to sleep. But there wasn't the forgiveness piece that I'm hearing is as part of that practice you're describing in the inquiry, and I appreciate that. Marina, how about for you?
Yeah. Well, I don't have a practice as such, but obviously because I'm so immersed in this subject and it's so close to my heart, it's there always. So if I feel my heart is closing and I'm becoming upset or angry about anything, it comes to mind that this is an opportunity, and that forgiveness has to lie somewhere within that mess. And I think because I see curiosity as the first step to forgiveness, I think if we think we have everything figured out, we're kind of stuck. So I think to be curious about others, if you feel aggrieved with someone, or someone's hurt you, or you're hanging on to something that you can't change, or you've been hurt in any way, to open up your mind to a different perspective, and to widen your lens so that you can see, this builds empathy, and helps you let go of resentment. So it's a very powerful tool. And I imagine, I shared before that I'm sort of in a bit of a spiritual vacuum myself at the moment, forever searching and not finding. But I imagine if you have something like Olivier described, it's incredibly helpful, because you've got a framework. I don't really have a framework. I've got my mind, which gets a bit too energetic at times. But I like one of the ex-offenders we worked with in the prison program that we talked about the 12-inch transition, which is when things move from the mind to the heart. And I really like that. And I can sometimes feel it moving from the the too active mind to that more open heart.
I've heard it said that that longest journey we ever take is the journey from our head to our heart. That 12, it may only be 12 inches, but it can
Yes.
take a lifetime
It's true.
to transverse that, to cross that.
How about for you, Eileen?
Yeah, such a great question. I want to first make just a couple comments on some things that have been said, and then I want to answer that because I think that's such a great and challenging question. So one of the reasons my work, I call it the path of forgiveness, the path of forgiveness. And purposely I picked that because I think this is a path. And the path begins in the muck that we don't even recognize is part of the path, but that is always where we start, is in the mess of it. And I love, Marina, that you really hold that place and sort of camaraderie, if you will, with, people who really don't want to forgive. And that's just not what's, I think that's so, so important because it's a choice. It's a choice. And it's only got power as a choice and as coming from a free will position, not any obligation or expectation or anything. So I really, really respect that, and it's really important. And I appreciate, I strive to do that, and I feel like you've reminded me today, just that is really important. So, and I wanted to tell you that Fred Luskin's definition Monday, because what I find is that I have a multitude, I don't have one, I have many, and apparently he does too. So his on Monday was making peace with no. And that's also good. So I think that's all good. So where I encountered today, I feel like, and I've said this before, that as a forgiveness teacher, I don't want to like tempt the universe here at all, but so many teachers came into the forgiveness work through profound tragedy. Holocaust survivors, survivors of crime, and it's just really hard things. I didn't, my path was different in that. But around the time I was getting interested in forgiveness, I did have a big forgiveness I needed to do in my life, having to do with the ending of a relationship. And I did go through a very, very powerful process with it, which then informed a lot of my work. And I know I always say, like, if you want to do this kind of work, you've got to go through it. So, for one thing, just to see how hard it is and how much courage it takes to walk towards the pain, if not through the fire. And so there was that. And then once I put the process together that I put together in the forgiveness workbook, I've gone through every time I would lead a retreat, because in my retreats, people do a lot of reflective work. They journal, they share in groups. So in the front of the room, I'm sitting there and I'm holding the space and leading it, but I'm not always engaging. So I would be going through the process too, which is to say I went through it, I don't know how many times, tens of times. And it's always very profound for me. I feel like I've done the big pieces of forgiveness in my life, but here's where my edges are. Two things. One is in very petty places that I'm embarrassed to admit, so I'll have to tell you. Driving a car. My son at one point shocked me by saying if I would like be saying something about a driver, like, "You idiot, don't pull in," da, 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 he'd say, "Mom, you have road rage." And I thought, that's not road rage. Road rage when you get out of your car and you go like, but then I realized, but it may not really be, road rage, but it really is pretty, violent energy. So I've worked on that, and I no longer do that or have that. But here's what I do still have. It happened yesterday. Somebody gets behind me. I'm at a light. The light turns, and it's not even a full second, and they're already blowing their horn. And there's a part of me that just wants to, of course, I go through the light and they're behind me, and then I just want to go really slow. I really have this like little passive aggressive desire that, okay, you're in a hurry, let's go slow. And I resisted it yesterday. It's like, don't do that. You know? So I've got work there. And by the way, I say these are petty things, but I feel like it's a microcosm, and that's why it's significant. That's why I work on it. Um, but that's an edge of my work right there, is how I respond to people I encounter like that. And that wanting to, and then what was funny yesterday is like one block later we got to another light that was red, and I pulled in and we stopped, and then I'm thinking, so, and I did toot my horn so that I could give them a message back. See, now we're just at another red light, big deal, we lost a half a second. So that was where I didn't overcome my passive aggressiveness. So here's the more significant one. Um, it has more to do with personal relationships and trust. And I'm in a relationship right now with somebody who, like, sometimes things come up and I watch myself kind of like a knee-jerk reaction of mistrust. And then I remind myself that person doesn't want to hurt you. That person, like again, it's a very like split second response where I have to remember that I could trust this person. They would never do anything intentionally to hurt me. And and that is the truth. But I watch that there's a part of me that's still in, I think, old trauma about being hurt. And I consider all of this forgiveness work because it's part of the path. You know, the path isn't just the day I'm letting it go, I'm forgiving. It's these little choices that either create a grievance in the first place or not, and are step forward towards healing. And, they're human too. They're feeling impatient in this moment. I've been there. I understand what that's like. So that's where my work is.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. And it has me reflecting on the conversation we had earlier this week about there's a stimulus typically coming from the outside, and then we have the potential of an immediate reaction to that stimulus, or we can respond in that space of do I react or do I respond? And I asked the question I asked, and I was listening into it just to get a sense of, for each of you, has that space in your life gotten bigger where you can more likely respond as opposed to react? And I'm hearing with each of you, it's situational.
And that was, yeah, Marquita shared that from Viktor Frankl's work, the space, and that all of our power is in that space. And so, I think that's exactly right. And then there was something else I wanted to say about it, which is that this work, I think it was part of your original question, but I think it's important to say that doing this work and forgiving and making those moment-to-moment choices in that space as many times as possible to go this way instead of this way, it has, I feel like, lifted my life up. I really feel like I've never really articulated this, but I've noticed it in the last year that I feel like the ground that I'm living on is higher. And, I'm somebody, and I've been through a lot of depression, a lot of difficult things that can get me down, and, so forth. And I just feel like this is it's raised me up. It's raised the vibration of my life so that if I admit it, if I let it in and recognize it, which, is also part of the work, it just gets better and better. It's like better and better. And that the things that I need show up when I need them. The synchronicity is more, the love is more, that there's so many blessings. And many people have, said this week, that place where life is happening for you, not to you. I really experienced that. It's just how beautiful it is. That wasn't always the case. I want to make that clear to everybody. Wasn't always the case, but it is now. And I feel like now it's a matter of, like I said, like admitting that, allowing it, trusting it.
Yes,
Yeah, thank you for
I
that.
can so much relate to what you just said, Eileen, because we started this session mentioning the spiritual dimension of forgiveness, and in the specific approach that I use, that I call circles of forgiveness, what I see is that at first you do it for yourself because you come with all this resentment and grudges and so on. So you experience the first circle as a healing of your own wounds. And when you come a second and a third and a 10th time, and I've done it hundreds of times, the less you are present just for yourself, it becomes bigger and bigger. One day you are standing there in the circle as a man, not as Olivier, but just as a man, and then as a member of whatever country or whatever. So you grow. It's like you become larger and larger, and you allow whatever needs to go through you and through the other people you are meeting. And I feel that forgiveness can really be a path from ego to the self. From when you talk about this higher ground, it's getting closer to spirit, getting closer to your soul. And I think it can be used that way. It doesn't have to be, but I realize that people that keep doing this work, something becomes more and more transparent. The light shines through. And I've been amazed. I've met so many people who've been alchemists. I mean, they've turned the worst lead into gold, the worst tests and awful drama in life into something beautiful. They radiate their love and something out of it. And I think forgiveness has this alchemical power to change something deeply inside of us.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Olivier, because I was thinking about this yesterday after the call, that something I hadn't been said, but along those lines for me, when I'm working with people privately in a retreat and doing my own work, that's what I often experience, that it brings me back to a connection to my soul level, to my own soul, the essence of my being. And when I'm working with somebody and I bring them back and help them come back to that place, to their light, the light that their, whatever you want to call it, their life force, their light, that from that place, the problem, the conflict with this, it everything becomes very clear to them. I talked yesterday about a case where a couple had forgiven each other, and they had been, very entrenched in a conflict over their deceased son and who was going to be in charge of the estate. And then they forgave. And then they really didn't care who was in charge of it because it really wasn't important. And all of a sudden they had opened their hearts again to each other. And that's what happens. Like, what's important, what's not important. People release conflict. I say it evaporates, but when anybody works with conflict, conflict isn't from an outsider, and say this is a mediator, you can come into a situation and see 3 or 4 possible solutions. Any one would be reasonable and fair. It's the emotions that get in the way. And so once those are resolved and they're not in the way, people access their wise adult, their soul wisdom, their spiritual core, and it's all resolved. I do think this is possible on a global level. It hasn't happened. And obviously there's some people and some groups who are very entrenched, and it's going to take a while. But to me, it's inevitable because it's the truth. We know it, we may not know it, be connected to it, not connected to it, but I believe that's what's happening here. So sooner or later, we move towards that.
Marina, a question for you. You're trained as a journalist. As a journalist, to be effective, you need a highly honed skepticism. And I'm curious, how do you reconcile and hold the skepticism you need in your journalistic work with forgiveness?
Well, yes, it's an interesting question. Actually, I should have described myself as a feature writer and a author, I think. I was not a political journalist. Once one of our tabloid papers got me to do some sort of undercover thing. Twice actually it happened. I did it so badly. Once they didn't publish it, the other time, they had to rewrite it themselves. So I think I'm not a very skeptical person. And what I love about journalism, and always did, was telling the stories of others. Giving people platform, giving people a voice, because when people are heard and when you bear witness specifically to pain or injustice, I think it moves the story along. And so I was more of a storyteller. I mean, I earned a living from journalism, feature writing. I think it's quite different, actually.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for clarifying. And I
Well,
would pose the same question to Olivier and to Eileen. As human beings, when someone is asking for forgiveness, the skeptic in us could be saying, what's their motivation? What's their agenda? What's their angle? And just curious for the two of you, does that skepticism show up, and how do you dance with it in the relationship of forgiveness?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I believe that the greatest power comes from asking forgiveness. And to understand this, as a Christian, I thought that forgiveness was a gift I was making to somebody else. If I'm nice, if I'm polite, if I'm a good Christian. And I realized that, first of all, it's a gift to oneself. Imagine that somebody attacks you at night in the streets with a knife, and you get a big wound in the arm, and it's bleeding. What are you going to do? Are you going to stay there hurting, bleeding, and say to your aggressor, I'll stay there and suffer just to bother you? No, of course not. You're going to try to find a doctor, a nurse. You're going to go to the hospital because you want to heal, because you don't want to suffer and be in pain. And it's exactly the same process with forgiveness, except that you've been hurt in the heart and it doesn't show, but it's bleeding inside, and there are burns and whatever. And if you decide to walk that path of forgiveness, it's to stop suffering. And the amazing thing is that you can do it without the other person being present, without even the other person asking for forgiveness. You can do it just as a gift to yourself. And once you are healed, then you can think about what is right to do with regards to the other person. You may even go to court, but you'll go to court to seek justice, not to seek revenge. You'll go to court because we live in society, there are laws, and you can't just let anybody do anything. And forgiveness should never be an excuse to let other people get away with nasty things that they've done. But first of all, it's a gift to oneself. It's how do I go about doing what I need to at last be able to love again, to have joy again, to have laughter again in my life. By saying this, I think I lost your question in the meantime. What was your original question, Tom?
I was just asking about when somebody's asking for forgiveness, the skeptic in us could question their motives. And
Yeah, but I understand why I started this way. I expect the healing to come from the work that I do myself. If somebody that has done me wrong comes to me and asks for forgiveness, I think first of all it's a fantastic gift for themselves. it means they've managed to release something, to let go of something, and they're walking on their own healing. It can be a gift for me too, because it's a step towards maybe reconciliation or something others. But I think first of all, anyone who is capable of asking for forgiveness is creating great conditions for inner healing.
Mm. Eileen?
Yeah, I don't know that I have skepticism in the way that you're speaking of. What came to mind when you asked that? Well, if somebody's asking to be forgiven, I think it's really akin to sort of an apology or an acknowledgement, which is often important, actually. I mean, that's often what opens the doorway for forgiveness between people. Although I hasten to add, as Olivia was saying, you don't need anybody to ask for forgiveness, and you actually don't need anybody to forgive, even if they don't apologize. You can still forgive them in your heart. But but if they are asking, and if they are acknowledging what they've done, and there is remorse, I mean, I that definitely opens me up, and I there's a fine line, like you can forgive somebody and still choose not to be in a relationship with them.
Mhm.
So that's a whole different question. But forgiveness, that I'm not holding on to this against you, absolutely. Something else that came to my mind when you were speaking with Marina is, I'm not sure how it fit into your question, but I'll share it, is just the place also that I've gotten to, maybe all of us have seen this, is I know for sure that if somebody's acting in a way, it's very difficult, very painful, very whatever, and maybe not forgiving at all, and sort of hardened. Like I really know that there's a lot of pain in there. So that's what I've learned to look at. It's like, oh, they're really, really wounded. Something's going, I get curious about that. So rather than judge or they don't deserve it or anything like that, it sort of, triggers that in me. I wonder, and when I'm working with people, I often ask them, to be curious on what might be going on with that person that they're acting that way. I find that really, really helpful. And
Mm.
rather than just, well, they're this, so I'm not going to forgive them. Well, and you still might not be ready to, but just to try to look at that, like, so that's more pain, more pain, more pain. Again, as Olivia is saying, doesn't mean there won't be consequences or whatever may be appropriate, but just on a human level, I think we all have this deeper soul aspect to ourselves that is not wounded. Um, you know, when you were speaking, Marina, I was thinking about, of storytellers, such a great word, versus journalist, probably that's even a better word, a storyteller. And I love that. And I know that your work has taken you recently to Rwanda. And I wonder if you might share about that. When I was at the Forgiveness Conference in France with Olivier, there was some survivor of that genocide who had become an incredible forgiveness teacher. And that's really probably how I most got familiar with what was happening. And now I think there was like a 30th anniversary. Can you
Yeah.
share with us about that?
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's the 30th anniversary of the genocide, and there was a big gathering in Kigali of activists and practitioners and academics from all over the world, looking at what lessons we could learn from that country. And it was truly fascinating. Just to remind people, the genocide, in 100 days, 1 million people were slaughtered. And they made a big thing about hate speech, which I thought was interesting. A lot of people said a year before the first person was murdered, hate speech was out of control, being spewed out from the radio, spoken by politicians. So that set the ground. So now, 30 years later, what is so interesting is forgiveness is a big theme undoubtedly, in Rwanda, it's their president, Kagame, has actually encouraged people to forgive in the sense that he says, don't forgive those who organized what happened, but try to forgive your neighbors who might have harmed your family or killed your family. And I think the reason for that is there's a very strong sense in Rwanda that to prevent any further sectarian interethnic violence, you need well-stitched communities. And the only way you can get that is putting people, they have reconciliation villages when they have put people back living together. And forgiveness, I heard stories about self-forgiveness. I heard stories about forgiving people who killed members of their family. And they frame it very differently. Some come with a very pure Christian faith, a determination to honor their God and their belief, and it's some struggle to get there. But, you know, we're talking 30 years later, and often forgiveness does take a long time, as we know. Some were reluctant to and couldn't. There was one man I met called Freddie Mutandua, who is the director of an organization called the Aegis Trust, which works with genocide denial and education in Rwanda. His whole family was slaughtered in the genocide, and he met two of the perpetrators. Finally, couple of decades later, he met the first perpetrator, the man who had murdered his mother, who was still in jail, which shows the level of the atrocity, because many of them had to be released. There were too many in prison. They were put back in the community. But when he went there, this man just sat in silence, he said. And he went with his sister, who was actually one remaining member of his family. This man sat in silence and refused to talk. And he came out and saying, forgiveness has to be earned. He said to him as he left, I'm going to come back in a year and you need to tell me what happened. That's why I'm here. I want to know what happened to my mother. And until you tell me, I won't forgive you. So I thought that was an interesting example, really, of what you might call conditional forgiveness, contractual forgiveness. He required change on the part of the offender. He also met another person who had been responsible, I think, for showing where his family were hiding. And Freddie said, this man was far more able to tell me the truth. There was more accountability. There was acknowledgement of the harm he'd done. And he said, I was so happy to forgive him, and forgiveness came so easily. So, you know, I'd be interested to know what Freddie would make, Olivia, of your process. Would he be able to do that? Or is he still holding on to there must be change on the part of the perpetrator before you deserve to be forgiven? So these were the conversations we had, but it should be said, I think you can't legislate for forgiveness, but undoubtedly the fact that forgiveness is such a rich part of the conversation in Rwanda has helped it stay 30 years later, one of the most peaceful countries in Africa, and actually remarkably successful country, yeah.
Appreciate you sharing all of that. I reminded that I guess I first really learned about what happened in a documentary that I saw even before I went to France, and they showed what had happened. And at the time, I remember thinking that they were showing the forgiveness tribunals or whatever they were called. And I did feel like it was kind of superficial, that they're telling people, okay, now forgive each other. And as if it was like a simple thing. And I thought, my God, this is all these atrocities. How can you just expect that to have an impact? So I'm really heartened to hear that it's continued over 30 years. This person you're relating, it's got meaning in the way, this is what I need from you in order to be able to do it, and that there has been an ongoing process. So maybe that was more of a beginning, and it's good to hear that. And the person that I met in France, John Paul Samputu, you know, he had a story where his best friend growing up killed his whole family. That's what is that right, Olivia? Something like that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And he did forgive, and he became a forgiveness teacher. But to experience something like that is just extraordinary. It's almost hard. It is hard to imagine to be in the middle of that and have that happen, and to so many people. So it's heartening to know that there has been, genuine healing coming forward out of all of it. Yeah.
If I may share something, one of the things that gives me a lot of hope in the future, and I think it was Desmond Tutu who said, "Without forgiveness, there is no future," is the fact that forgiveness can be worked also in a global, in a transpersonal way. 6 years ago, we started what is called the Caravan of Forgiveness. The idea is that we go to places where there has been tragic events in the past. It may be the recent past, few decades. It may be a lot older. Maybe you have experienced that. I have at least twice, being in a place and feeling energies and emotions that don't belong to you, but that belong to the place because something hasn't yet found peace, like if ghosts are still there or whatever energies. And so what we do is that we offer a circle of forgiveness to that place. We don't do it for ourselves, for our own wounds. We do it so that anything that needs to find peace, anything that needs to find resolution here may happen. And we've done this several times by now. Usually we've been around 80 to 100 people gathered. I may even share just a recent picture of it just to give you an idea. This is a place in France where there has been terrible events during the Second World War. So here we were about 86 people doing this circle of forgiveness, and we were lucky to have somebody playing the violin. We didn't have a music on the Bluetooth device, but live music. And it's amazing to hear what people feel during a circle that is offered to a place. How when you have somebody in front of you who is either asking forgiveness to you or you're asking forgiveness to them, you can feel that something is being exchanged at a very deep level. I don't know if you're familiar with family constellations, but it's the same transpersonal dynamic. And I believe we could hold circles like that in so many places. And Marina, when I hear what you share, I wonder if this person could be part of a circle like this, not with exactly the people that murdered his family, but just other people. And what would happen for him to be part of a circle where forgiveness is being exchanged in that way. I've seen so much magic happening in just barely an hour and a half or 2 hours with this very simple ritual that I believe it can really help cure a lot of our collective wounds and pains.
I love that.
I was sitting here with an observation and a question about going from genocide to ecocide, and what might a process or a ritual look like where humanity is asking Mother Earth for forgiveness for the ecocide that each of us commit every single day through the way that we're living on the planet. And I'm curious if there's anything there for any one of you about
It's
that.
interesting that you should ask that, because I've mentioned the 4 steps of the ritual that we use in circles of forgiveness, but over the past maybe 4 or 5 years, I've added something that relates to nature and the oceans and the air and the trees and the animals and so on, and even asking forgiveness from life itself. And it's one of the very emotional moments that people may go through during the process. And I think we definitely need that.
Yes.
I think the only thing what I immediately thought of, Tom, when you mentioned that, was that Willy Brandt went to Warsaw after the Second World War. He was the German Chancellor, and he went to the Jewish memorial, and he just fell to his knees. He genuflected, and he asked, and he said nothing. He said no words. And afterwards he was asked why, and he said, I did what humans do when words fail them. So I've always been very moved by that. And I think words fail me in that question because it's so big. And all you can do is sort of kneel in a way and ask for forgiveness.
I think that is one of the most powerful needs, to ask for forgiveness from the earth, that we all do need to do. And you know me well enough to know that where my mind automatically goes, we need to do this. We need to do more of these caravans, and we need to organize this. And and we just all need to do it ourselves. You don't, but the group. And seeing that circle is really beautiful. And I thought about, I know that October 7th is upon us next week, doing a circle like that at that festival site where some of the killing began in Israel and other places. That just seems like, but I don't know how you pick your places. That might be a whole other conversation. But in terms of healing for the earth, I mean, I think that's a really powerful idea, important idea.
Well, as we come up to the, go ahead, Olivia.
Just very briefly, you mentioned earlier, Eileen, that the process couldn't be done online. Actually, it can, even though it's less powerful than with real people in front of you. During COVID, we held not circles of forgiveness, but meditation of forgiveness based on the same process.
Yes.
And I've been amazed to hear people who would probably never have come personally to attend a circle, but they were at home behind their screen, and people were in tears, were moved, were able to release things. We had so much beautiful testimonies that it's something that still exists now, that we can again hold a normal circle with real people in real places. So it's interesting to know that even in this way, it can be very powerful.
That's very good to hear. And I see your point. You can do the inner work. I was thinking about the face-to-face work, which we did, I think, try in, we thought maybe in breakout rooms, maybe, but it actually just was difficult. But you're right, the meditation part, I can see that would be very effective. Yeah.
Well, as we come to the end of the program, any final thoughts from Olivier or Marina?
I wouldn't mind just reading my latest favorite definition of forgiveness, if I may, because I like to share what others say. This is from Khaled Hosseini's The Kite Runner. Some people will have read it. And he writes, I wondered if this was how forgiveness budded, not with the fanfare of epiphany, but with pain, gathering its things, packing up, and slipping away unannounced in the middle of the night.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
What I'd like to say is that when you read the newspaper every morning, you have pages on economy, pages on politics, pages on business, and so on. And most of what we hear in the news is how people do not get along, how many violence and conflicts and misunderstandings and disagreements there are. So in the end, it's like medias are telling us all the different ways in which human beings don't get along with each other. And I think forgiveness is the major work that we have to do to heal our relationships to one another, our relationships to nature, our relationships to a dimension of transcendence. And I know some people say, no, 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 the most important thing is ecology, the environment. But I don't believe 1 second that we'll find the right way to heal the planet if we don't heal our own wounds first. I mean, the two can be done simultaneously, but this healing of our relationships to ourselves, to others, and to everything can open new avenue, new ideas, new ways of healing our collective wounds as well.
Yeah, thank you, especially for that that last piece about the self-forgiveness. Eileen, it's been an extraordinary week. Thank you for bringing Olivier and Marina to us today, and all of the panelists we've had this week. Any closing comments or thoughts from you on the week?
It's just been a beautiful week and a joy to be able to bring in these wonderful people that I've met on the path of forgiveness. You know, people talk about the Camino, what is it? The Camino in Spain, and you talk, you know, there's all these pathways on the planet that are very powerful for people, but this is one that's powerful for me, the path of forgiveness. And I meet extraordinary people on this path. And so it's just been a joy to be here. I've learned a lot. I enjoyed immensely. And again, just want to thank you, Tom, Humanity Rising, Ubiquity University, Jim Garrison, who I haven't met yet, and all the people behind the scenes that are making this possible. It's beautiful.
Well, thank you, Eileen. Thank you again, Marina and Olivier.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful program. And to our audience, thank you for being with us today and this week. And I'll just extend an invitation to join us again next week, where I'll be hosting a week on the future of God. We've got an extraordinary group of panelists who will be with us to talk about the future of God and our relationship with God, and from multiple religious and academic perspectives, and the role that God can play for us in our future. So another exciting week. Thank you again for being with us this week, and for those of you who can join us on Monday, look forward to seeing you then. Thanks, everyone.